you should see the map. You might also see a blank map because it can be tricky to configure this correctly. In that case, you'll find a link with a lot of discussions and solutions to that in the video description. Also make sure, because that's one common source, that in your credentials page here, if you go to library, you can go to Google Maps Android API, that this is enabled. Enable it otherwise if this is not the case. With that, you should see the map here. Now it would be nice to have some margin between the map and the button. So I'll quickly go to my user's map and add a style to the map container where I say margin top of 20 maybe. And now, of course, we wanna maybe show a different snippet, a different part of the world when it loads, and also move the focus of the map once the user picked a location. Now, for starting with a certain region being focused on the map, let's have a look at the official docs here on Airbnb Create React Native Maps. So on this GitHub repository you found via Google. There, if you scroll down, you will find a code snippet where we set an initial region prop to some object that has a latitude, a longitude, and a latitude delta and a longitude delta. Now this is how you describe a region in or for the React Native Maps package. A region has a latitude and longitude for the center basically, and then the deltas for both coordinates to describe a circle or a part around that center. So how far do we go to left and right and to top and bottom from that point? So I'll just copy that setup here into our code for the map view here. So there, let's simply set initial region. And the important point about initial region, by the way, is that this will only be set initially, as the name implies, and will not refocus if you ever were to change this during runtime. And here I will maybe decrease this a little bit to zoom in closer. If I now save this and we go back to our application, you see we're zoomed in on San Francisco here. So this is the initial region. I now also want to focus onto the place the user sits in when I got that user location. So for that, I'll go back to the app.js file, and in there, I'll add my state property because I want to manage all the application state in here. You can also use Redux with React Native. I won't do it in this video. It's basically as easy to add as you add it to a normal React app, and I will also cover it in my Udemy course if you're interested. So here I'll set the normal state as you set it in any React component, any class-based component. And here I'll set this user location to null initially. Now, if we got a position here, I will call this set state, and there I will set user location to an object where I have a latitude property that is equal to position, and there we had a chords object, and there we had a latitude property too. And I will set a longitude property that's equal to position chords longitude. Now I also need to set the delta since I want to not only navigate to a point, but also keep a certain zoom. So I will just copy longitude and latitude from there, or alternatively hard code it in there. So whatever approach you want to use, feel free to do so. I'll simply copy it here and add it to my user location. And with that, we got that in the state. Now we want to pass it down to user's map. So there, I'll pass a user location property and bind it to this state user location. And in user's map, we now need to accept this property and do something with it. As I said, changing the initial region at runtime won't do much, but we can also set the normal region. And this will be updated during runtime. So we can set this equal to props user location, the props we just added, and it will then focus on that location on the map. Now with that, if we go back and we click get location, you should move to basically the Googleplex. This is where they sit. Would be nice to also see a marker, wouldn't it? Of course, we can display one. In the map view, let's convert it from a self-closing tag to a non-self-closing one, because in between the opening and closing tag, we can add another component, the map view marker component. And check out the docs of React Native Maps for a full list of all the components and features they have. They have a lot. MapViewMarker is a self-closing one. It needs a coordinate prop. And this is now not a region. It doesn't care about deltas. It just wants a position defined by latitude and longitude. So here to coordinate, we can also just pass props user location. This object will have the deltas, but it will just ignore them here, so that's fine. If we reload, we'll get an error. Do you know why? Because initially in app.js, our user location is null. So we try to set a marker on a position we don't have at the beginning. The solution is simple. Only render this if we got a user position. So here, prior to returning something in that function, I'll create a new variable, user location marker, which is null. But then I'll check if props user location is trueish, so if it's not null, then user location marker will be that marker code. And then I can just output this variable, user location marker, down there in my JSX code. This is how we conditionally render content in React. With that, now it works again. And if I click get location, we center onto our position and we also have that marker, which is great. Now, of course, we don't just want to have our location, we want to see that location of other users too, right? Now, in order to do this, we need to store it on a server in a database, and we need to fetch it from there. Now, I will use Firebase as a backend, and for that, I created a new Firebase project by visiting Firebase page, going to the console, creating a new project. And in that new project, you should go to the database tab and take the real-time database. In there, visit the rules and make sure that read and write are both set to true so that anyone can read and write to your database. Not settings you want to use in production, but settings which are great for our dummy app here. In production, you typically have an authentication flow to only allow authenticated users to post data and read data. But here, we won't add authentication. I instead will send a HTTP request, a post request, to this endpoint and a nested URL actually, to store my place on this database. And of course, you could use any other backend too. I just use Firebase because it's easy to use. If you get your own backend, definitely use that. The approach I show you here will work with any backend. So we want to send a request here whenever we got the user location. So what I will do is, after calling setState, I will send a HTTP request with the fetch API. Now the fetch API is basically the modern replacement for XML HTTP request in JavaScript, you could say. It's a browser API, which is made available to you by React Native. You can find more information about this in the JavaScript environment page I showed you earlier in the video. And the fetch API, as a first argument, takes a URL you want to send your request to. So that's this Firebase URL. And there I actually want to target a places node. And for Firebase, I need to add .json at the end. It's really just a Firebase database thing. You don't need to add this for your own backend. And places, this will create a new places node. Now I want to send a post request, so I need to set up a second argument here. One argument only would send a get request. The second argument is a JavaScript object where I configure this request. For example, by setting method to post, turning this from a get to a post request. And again, this is just a normal fetch API. If it's unclear to you how it works, check out some docs on it. It's just React Native's implementation of it. Now, we send a post request. We also need to send a body. So let's specify a body property. And this now needs to be a JSON string. So we can use JSON stringify to turn a JavaScript object into such a string. And I just want to send an object that holds a latitude and a longitude. So I will just copy latitude and longitude from there. I don't care about the deltas. I just want to store positions which I will use for markers that don't care about deltas either. And with that, we send this to Firebase. Now, fetch gives us back a promise, so I can chain then here to get back a response and log that response to the console, and catch to catch any errors during that. Not server-side errors or 404 errors, but errors due to connectivity problems, for example. Now, if we save that and I click get location, I get back a 200 response, so that's looking good. Looks like it worked. If I check out Firebase, I see the places node, and in there a new element with this cryptic ID That's an ID automatically generated by Firebase. And in there, I see my latitude and longitude, so that's looking promising. We're storing data. Obviously, we want to get it to output markers of other users too. So what I'll first of all do is I'll just get my location again, hence creating a second object with the same coordinates. But now we'll manually tweak the coordinates a little bit, set this to 8, 2 maybe here, and the latitude to 4, 1. So just tiny adjustments so that it doesn't go all the way to the other end of the world. And hitting enter helps in saving these changes, by the way, so make sure to save them. And now we got two different positions, which I want to see if I see different markers. You could, of course, also launch your app on a second device, and it should work if you then get a different location there. Now we need a button to fetch the location. So I will add a button here above my fetch location component. I need to import that button from React Native, therefore. And I will wrap this button in a view component simply because this view element makes it easy for me to style that. And I will add inline style here, which you can do. Don't have to bind to a style sheet object, though it is preferred. But here I'll quickly add an inline style where I say margin bottom to 20 to have some distance to the fetch location button. Now I'll give this button a title of get user places, and on press we'll execute a method. Now I'll add this method here. I'll name it get user places handler, like this. So let's target this here, this get user places handler. And in that method, I'll again send a fetch request. I'll copy the logic from this fetch request here actually. But I will not send a second argument because I want to send a get request to this node. So just like that. On the other hand, I don't just want to log the response. Instead, I will call log response JSON here to take the JSON out of it. And then in the next then call, I'll have the parsed response. This is essentially how fetch works. We first of all get back the response with the code and the unparsed data body, and then with JSON we can parse that and we get back the body in a JavaScript object form. So here we have this object, and that's an important thing. We probably want to have an array to conveniently loop through it and output a couple of markers for the different items in the array. On Firebase, we store everything in this object format though. So here we got the places object, which has these cryptic strings here as properties, and then the values would be these objects here. So we have nested objects where these are the keys. We need to convert that object into an array therefore. So I'll create a new places array here, which is an empty array at the beginning. And then with a for in loop, where I get my keys of parsed response, I can extract these places. So I can then call places array push and push a new JavaScript object there where I will have a latitude. We need that for the marker, which is parsed response for that given key. And then there will be a latitude property because we're storing latitude and longitude there. And therefore the same, of course, for longitude. And then I'll add a third element, third property, which I'll name ID, which will be just my key. That cryptic key, so that I have that stored here too, will be helpful for looping, would be helpful if you add some update functionality or delete functionality. This is the ID under which it is stored on Firebase. Now that array needs to be stored in the state of this component. So I'll add a user places array, which is empty initially, to my state. And then here, where I got my places in an array, outside of the for in loop, I'll set this or call this set state. And now set state should set the state of user places equal to my places array I got here. With that, I got an array of these places. I, of course, want to output them on my map though. So to my map component, I'll pass user places. You can name this property whatever you want.